Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Selling Greenville, your favorite real estate podcast here in Greenville, South Carolina. I am your host as always, Stan McCune, and I'm a realtor right here in Greenville. You can find all of my contact information in the show notes. If you need a realtor in this area or outside this area, I can help you understand Greenville. When I say Greenville, we're talking about the upstate, right? Greenville is just the main city of the upstate, the main county of the upstate. There are many counties. In fact, I recently had to drive 2 hours between showings in multiple different counties, so that was fun. And that's sometimes what happens. We have to have kind of a broad area in just the way this market is, the way the Greenville specific market is. So anyway, my contact info is in the show notes if you need a realtor in this area. And just take a second to like the show if you're on YouTube, to subscribe to future episodes, hit the little subscribe button. Whatever platform you're on, if you can leave a rating or a review, I would appreciate that as well. Today we're going to be talking about real estate schemes that you need to look out for. And when I say schemes, I'm not necessarily talking about things that are illegal or even inherently unethical. So I want to make that very, very clear, because there might be, depending on who listens to this or watches this, some people might think that I'm calling them out. I'm not going to name names or anything like that. But I'm not calling out anyone, just to be clear. These are practices that are fairly common, and sometimes the general public doesn't exactly know what's going on when it comes to these real estate schemes. And these schemes are Greenville specific. I want to make that clear as well. Some of these might be in some other markets. I'm not saying that they're not in other markets, but this is a Greenville show. And some of these things might not pertain to other areas. So I just want to make sure that you guys know that. But if you're someone that's listening and you're looking to buy or sell a home at some point in the near future in this area, you need to be aware that there are some things that's being done right now in the real estate world in this area that can sometimes catch people off guard, or they don't fully understand it. And in some cases, it is illegal or unethical what is happening. In other cases, it's just that realtors or other people practice real estate a certain way, and have certain things that they do, and maybe their system is not in the best interest of their clients, which is fundamentally, in my opinion, not right. And they would argue, they would say, no, this is in the best interest of my clients, but I'm going to build a case here for why it, in some of these instances, may not be. And again, a lot of it comes down to, before I get into the specifics, I'm going to go through 10 real estate schemes here. A lot of what I'm going to get into, again, the schemes themselves aren't necessarily wrong. A lot of it comes down to how it's explained to the public. And I've noticed very frequently that things are not explained well. In fact, the Real Estate Commission has noticed this as well and has started to crack down on some of these things. All right, so with all of that in mind, let's talk about the very first scheme. And the very first scheme that I want to talk about here is realtors that put something to the effect of this in the remarks, specifically what we call the syndication remarks. These are the remarks, the notes on the listing that are sent out to other websites. And some websites only pull these notes, like I believe Realtor.com only pulls from the syndication notes. It does not pull syndication remarks. It does not pull from the other remarks, okay? And so what you put in there on some websites is the only thing that is out there. And here's what I've found, is that there are instances where people will put in the standard remarks the description of the home, and then in the syndication remarks, they will put, this listing is presented by XYZ Realtor or XYZ Brokerage, without any description about the property at all. So what happens when people go to look up that property on Realtor.com or a comparable website that only pulls from the syndication remarks? They're not going to find the description of the property. All that they're going to find is this listing is presented by XYZ Brokerage or by XYZ Realtor or by XYZ team, whoever you want to put in there. Is that in the best interest of the seller? or even of buyers out there in the market, that there is no description. All that there is a way to get in contact, and there's always a phone number in there, a way to get in contact with the listing agent. You know what that scheme is? That is a scheme for the listing agent to try to get more business. They're trying to get buyers to come and call them for information regarding the property, for showings, etc., etc. That's the reason why they're doing that. Like, let's be honest. That's exactly what's happening there. And I'm sure that the people that do this, what their explanation would be is, well, if they call me versus calling someone else, I represent you. So this is in your best interest. But if there's no listing description that they can look at very easily, they might not even call that agent, right? They don't have the information that they need on the listing in order to place that phone call. And again, I'm not saying it's wrong. There's nothing illegal. There's nothing inherently unethical about doing that. The syndication remarks are the place to put the contact information for the realtor. They don't allow you to put it in the standard remarks. So there's nothing wrong about doing that. The question is it in the best interest of the seller? And I think more often than not, it's not in the best interest of the seller. You want to, those listing descriptions are important. I use my listing descriptions to explain things that you can't obviously see in the photos, or to add color to what's there in the photos. And so, if I were to just put this listing is presented by Stan McCune, and then my phone number, I could not do that with a clear conscience, me personally. I don't feel like that is the best thing for my clients. So be aware of that. Number 2 on here, we buy houses. We've talked about this before, but it's been a minute. I feel like it's worth bringing this one back up. You see the signs all over the place. We buy houses. There's all the websites out there. We buy houses. Here's what you need to be aware of with the we buy houses people. They usually don't buy houses. Almost none of them that put those bandit signs up actually buy houses. You know what they're doing? They're wholesaling. And wholesaling in the state of South Carolina is now illegal. What is wholesaling? Wholesaling is when you get a property under contract, generally speaking, you get a property under contract, and then you market that contract to other potential investors with a markup, right? So you might get it under contract for $100,000, and then you reach out to other investors and try to sell it to them for $150,000. But you don't own the property yet, and therein lies the rub. The state of South Carolina requires you to, if you're going to market a property, you have to either have a listing agreement you have to be a realtor that has a ratified listing agreement with the seller, or you have to own the property. Those are the only 2 ways to market a property for sale. Wholesalers don't do either of those things. The We Buy Houses people, they're not doing either of those things. What they're doing is they're getting a property under contract, and then in some cases, unbeknownst to the seller, then marketing that contract for a markup. You have to be super duper careful when it comes to this kind of stuff. I've known a lot of wholesalers over the years. A lot of them, when they used to do wholesaling, did it the right way. But there's still a lot of people out there that are putting up those We Buy Houses signs and websites and whatnot, and they are doing this, and it's illegal. This one is very much illegal if they have no intention to buy the property. Now, what they could do, theoretically, that would be okay, at least the way I understand the law. Talk to an attorney if you want to fully understand this. Let's say that they go into a property with, they get a property under contract, and then they have a realtor do a CMA for them, or they have, a contractor walk the property to provide for them a quote, and then that realtor or the contractor makes an offer on the property and says, you know what, actually, I want to buy this. I think that would probably be okay because they're not marketing the property, and then, at that point you negotiate, and then they can still assign that contract for a markup to the end buyer. But the core thing is that they were never marketing that contract to those people. They were just involving those people in order to try to better, understand what they are purchasing as part of their due diligence. But if they never, ever had the plan to purchase the property, that's a problem. And that's a scheme that is still happening all around the place right now, and people need to be aware of that. Number 3 on this list, brokerage exclusive listings. Now this one, this is going to be a controversial one, okay? Because first off, brokerage exclusive listings, they're very common. In fact, I do them sometimes. And there is nothing inherently illegal or unethical about them. What they are is they're basically, if I take a listing, I can choose to not put it on the MLS. Of course, the seller has to agree to that. We can choose to only market it basically within my brokerage. Okay. Now that might sound, probably if you're not aware of brokerage exclusive listings, you're probably immediately like, well, that sounds awful. Why would I want to do that instead of putting it out there for the entire market? Why would I only want your firm to look at it? That's a very, very good question. And there are some instances that there's actually a big debate amongst realtors, a big divide between realtors that work for big companies and realtors that are either, owner operators of their own company, or work for a small company. Big debates over whether these brokerage exclusive listings should even be legal or not. I think they should be. Granted, I'm with a bigger company. And so, we have more of these. This benefits my clients, whereas for me to have buyer clients, it's beneficial that I work for a big company and we get some of these brokerage exclusive listings. And I've had multiple closings over the years where clients get these properties. And sometimes you can get them without having all the competition from the rest of the market. That could be a great win-win. For sellers, it can be a win-win because maybe they do it off the MLS first while they're kind of getting the property ready, and maybe they can get it under contract without even having to do all the work to get the property ready for photos and all of that. That's great. Maybe it's a seller that wants to like a celebrity or something like that they don't want their property, their photos and whatnot to be out there on the internet. It's great for that. It's great for a variety of things like that. Investment properties, right? Property that is in like foreclosure, well, maybe not in foreclosure, but a property that's in disrepair, right? Sometimes brokerage exclusive listings can be great for that because you can kind of narrow, it can allow the realtor to market it to investor specific realtors versus putting it out there and having all of these agents that are untrained looking at a property that needs a lot of work. The thing is, okay, and here's where it's a scheme to be on the lookout for, is that a lot of agents will do this specifically, especially if they are the broker of their company or the owner of the company, whatever. They will do brokerage exclusive listings just so that they can try to represent both sides of the party, both sides of the transaction, both buyer and seller, or at least so they can get their firm to represent both sides. And if that's the only reason, if there's no benefit to the seller, that's a problem. And that's something that you need to be aware of. You need to fully, before you agree to brokerage exclusive listings, you need to be fully aware of the pros and cons of doing so. In fact, the Real Estate Commission recently produced a guidance letter and a form that they want people to be signing now for brokerage exclusive listings that really breaks down how, this might not be in your best interests. You need to be aware that only exposing your home to a small portion of the market might not get you the highest price, et cetera, et cetera. I'm paraphrasing. But yeah, the Real Estate Commission is obviously concerned about it, and that's why they are producing these letters. And I suspect there will be more reform at some point within the Realtor Association with regard to brokerage exclusive listings. But for now, they're here. It's a good mechanism. In certain instances, I would not say that every single listing should have them. Number 4. And this is one that frequently happens in like open house situations or other kinds of situations. But when a realtor convinces a non-client who is interested in said realtor's listing to quickly sign a a buyer agency agreement for them to represent them before putting an offer on the listing. That, honestly, it's not technically illegal, but it's definitely unethical. And I've heard people talk about this before. So imagine, I'll just paint the picture here. Imagine you're an unrepresented buyer. You don't have an agent. You walk into an open house. You meet the listing agent. You love the house. You say, I want to put an offer on the house. What that agent should do is say, well, I represent the seller. You need to be aware of that. You have the option to take a buyer agent if you want. But because I represent the seller, I can't suddenly now bring you on board and now operate as a dual agent. What they can do is they can work as what we call a transaction broker with the buyer, which basically the buyer maintains their unrepresented status. They're not represented by that realtor, but the realtor, the listing agent, can write up offers for them, can show the house to them, et cetera, on behalf of the seller. But they have to give the buyer the opportunity to hire a buyer agent. If that listing agent then basically makes that buyer their client and then competes with the seller, that's not in their seller's best interest, right? They have just functionally broken their fiduciary relationship with their seller by doing that. That's a problem. And trust me, this is something that happens very, very often. Now, what I'm not saying that the listing agent can't do, I'm not saying the listing agent can't bring that buyer on as a client. I'm just saying if the only reason they're bringing that buyer on as a client is so that they can represent both sides of a transaction, they're not actually going to show that buyer any other homes, that's unethical behavior. And that's something that a realtor could theoretically get in trouble for. In fact, some brokerages in our area don't even allow dual agency at all. My company does, but we have to have a pre-existing relationship with the buyer. In other words, the buyer, let's say that I have a buyer client that's interested in one of my listings. I can represent them. I was working with that buyer client before I got the listing, right? And so that's a different situation altogether. But for me to meet a buyer because I have a listing and then to quickly have them sign that agreement, that's a scheme that you need to look out for. And it's not a good one. It's not a good one. The buyer should remain unrepresented or should find another agent. Number 5 on here, sending a multiple listing change form instead of a release a listing. Okay. This is if you're not a realtor, you're gonna be like, what? Let's say that you have your home listed. Let's say I'm listing your home for you. You say, Stan, I want to take my home off the market. Okay. Technically, that listing agreement is a contract. Okay. And so both parties have to agree to that. In fact, in many instances, the broker over the office, depending on how the listing agreement is worded, the broker may have to sign for you to release that listing. However, what happens in some instances is some agents will actually send an MLS change form taking the home off the MLS, but not releasing the listing. Okay? And so what that does is that changes it. We just talked about these brokerage exclusive listings. That's what's happening there is they are basically taking it from the MLS and making it now brokerage exclusive so that their office still has the listing. It's just not being marketed to anyone. That one, again, there's nothing illegal about that. And if the request of the seller was to do that, there's also nothing unethical about it. Where I've seen it be unethical, in my opinion, and I believe an attorney would also agree with me on this, is when the seller doesn't know, when the seller actually just wants to be released to the listing. They no longer want to sell their home, and they think that they have terminated their listing, but in reality, the listing is still active with the brokerage. And I've seen this happen before. And that is something it's a sneaky thing, right? Because you've signed something, it appears that you've taken it off the market, all of that, but you haven't. You've only taken off of the MLS. Be very, very aware and be very, very clear when you're talking to your agent, what it is that you're trying to do. And similarly, number 6 here, you need to be looking out for situations where there is a client agreement being terminated without paperwork. And here's what oftentimes will happen here. You'll have, let's say that you're a buyer, you're working with a buyer agent, and the buyer agent is, part-time, for instance, and, their schedule just doesn't allow for them to be available when you need them. I'm just throwing that out there. This is not an example, not pulling that example from a recent experience or anything like that. I'm just making that one up. And so you say, you know what? It's really best for us to, I really need another agent, that's available during business hours or whatever. You're not available during business hours because you work a different job. You're a part-time realtor. Can we move on from working together? Can I find someone that's full-time? Agent says, yep, no problem. Go ahead. Use this email as confirmation that we have terminated our agreement. That is not a proper termination of the agreement. That doesn't work. You can't just send an email and undo a contract. Contracts don't work that way. In a buyer agency agreement, any sort of a realtor representation agreement, whether it's a buyer agency agreement or a listing agreement to sell a home, those are contracts. Contracts between you and not just the agent. Okay, this is very important. It's actually not a contract with the agent at all. The agent is representing the brokerage that they work for. So it's actually a contract between you and the brokerage. The agent cannot, on behalf of the brokerage, send out an email that terminates that contract. That is not legal. Okay, that's not how this works. And so you could actually be on the hook for owing the brokerage a commission in that instance. You go and sign on with another realtor. You still have an active contract to be represented by a realtor with another brokerage. You could owe 2 commissions. Okay? You don't want to do that. And I have seen this many, many times. I've had many instances where people have come to me where they were working with an agent. They no longer want to for whatever reason. And the agent just doesn't want to do the paperwork to terminate the contract for whatever reason. Maybe they don't think it's necessary. Maybe they're still trying to hang on for dear life to that client. I don't know. Whatever the case may be. You've got to get that agreement, that contract terminated in writing, not in an email, with signatures. Okay? What signatures, DocuSign, .loop, whatever. It's got to be done that way. So that's a big one that I see quite a bit, and that's definitely a scheme to look out for. Number 7. This is going to be another controversial one. Listing a home initially as temporarily off the market before switching it to active status later. All right, this is another in the weeds one. And this one is, again, a gray area where it's not always unethical. It's not always against the seller's best interest, but in some instances it is. Here's what's going on here. We have a status in the multiple listing service called temporarily off the market. We call it as realtors TO, okay? You can take a home TO, like let's just say that you've got your home listed and we're about to enter the holiday season and you're just like, you know what? I still want to sell my home. And I still want people to know that I want to sell my home. I just don't want to I have family coming over for the holidays and whatnot. I can't be doing showings. Can we just take it temporarily off the market for a couple of weeks to get through the holiday season? Absolutely. That's where the MLS change form that we just talked about comes into play. You can change it from active to TO. And then after the holiday season is up, you can change it back from TO back to active. Here's what some agents do. Because currently, which may change in the near future, but currently we don't have a coming soon status. Okay, coming soons are likely to happen in different pockets of South Carolina where previously they weren't, because there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff in the backdrop with Zillow and Redfin and Homes.com and whatnot having these pre-marketing options. I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but what people have been doing as a workaround for coming soons is listing a home as temporarily off the market so that it shows up in the multiple listing service. It shows up on websites as, with all the photos, with the description, with everything, but it's not active, okay? Here's the tricky thing. You can't show a home that's in TO status. Additionally, some of the market doesn't know what temporarily off even is, right? Everyone knows what coming soon is, but to list something as temporarily off, like, not every buyer understands. They pull it up and they're just like, okay, it looks like this home just came on the market, but it's saying it's temporarily off the market. Like, what's going on there? I don't think oftentimes that's in the best interest of the seller. It's sending out mixed signals. It can look like maybe there's something wrong with the property because sometimes TO status is people are trying to fix up a property as well. Like, that could be a reason why you have to take it off the market. And so it's very confusing. And then it opens the door for unethical behavior as well, because you can't legally, according to MLS rules, you can't show the house while it's in TO status. Well, what happens if someone calls up the agent and says, hey, I want to look at the house? Technically, that agent's not supposed to show it to him. Are they doing it? Some might. And guess what? This is another way for the agent to collect more buyer leads. Are you sensing a theme here with some of these, that it's not about the seller's best interest in some of these instances, that oftentimes it can be about the listing agent or the listing brokerage's best interest. And that's why you need to be aware. You need to ask questions about, like, okay, but what if people think this, or what if people think that? Do the pros outweigh the cons here? Especially when the only very obvious pro is to the company that has the home listed. And so be aware of that. That one's probably the most controversial one on here, right? Because because we don't have that coming soon status at the moment. And this is, it can help a seller in theory. Can maybe generate buzz ahead of time, but again, it's confusing. It's sending out mixed signals. I would be very, very wary of that. When I do it, if I have a client that's just like, hey, I really want to put this out there, and kind of, do kind of a coming soon kind of concept, this is really the best way to do that. You can also do it as brokerage exclusive and start pre-marketing it to your firm. That's another way to do that. And that's another way that the brokerage exclusive listings can be useful. But some people abuse these things and just do it for every single listing. I don't think anything I'm saying or anything that I'm listing out in here should be done for every single listing. I think it should be case by case. Realtors that say, I do this for every single listing, be wary of that. Ask questions. Number 8. We're going to talk about lenders for a second here, okay? I've been beating up on realtors. How about lenders sending rates, like a percentage? We'll do 6% in terms of your mortgage rate. We'll do 6%, whatever the percent is that they're throwing out there, 5.75, something that's eye-popping, without disclosing what their fees are. And man, I cannot tell you how often I have seen this, that lenders will do this and they put a bunch of fees, a bunch of junk fees in there to offset the fact that they are giving you a quote unquote lower rate. It's not a lower rate. You're paying for the lower rate by virtue of paying all of these upfront fees. But because they don't disclose the fees upfront, you get hit with, blindsided with that later after you've already chosen to work with that lender on the basis of their lower rate. Be very aware. That is very common. You need to get a full loan estimate, an official loan estimate from the lender if you are price shopping multiple lenders, because they will do funny things. They will rob Peter to pay Paul with some of these numbers. And you don't want to be the person that ends up choosing a lender that's actually more expensive than all the others, but they tricked you by saying, well, we could do a lower rate than all of the others, when really they're just telling you to basically pay upfront for that rate decrease. Be very, very careful when dealing with that. Always ask for a full loan estimate upfront. And if the lender won't do that, that lender's gone. Do not work with a lender that won't provide for you a loan estimate, or that I would even be wary if they are like, well, I can do that. I don't normally do that. Like if they're hemming and hawing, that should be a normal thing for them. If they're hemming and hawing and acting like that's not normal, that's a bad sign. I would move on from them right away. Number 9, back to realtors. We have this thing called a brokerage disclosure. Technically, it's the South Carolina Disclosure of Brokerage Relationships that the Real Estate Commission has produced for us. All realtors and the general public hate this form. It is what I'm just going to call it like I see it. We all hate this form. And the reason why we hate this form is because it says the first time you make substantive contact with someone regarding real estate, you have to explain and all parties sign the form. But it is a disclosure, it's not contractual. Well, guess what? Nobody wants to sign anything the first time they're talking real estate with a realtor. But letter of the law, we are supposed to do that. We are supposed to have you sign this brokerage disclosure the first time we have a serious real estate discussion. That has caused, some agents to get really fast and loose. Because, again, nobody wants to do this. It can hurt your business. I have had times where people say, you're pushing too hard for me to sign this. I'm done. I'm out. I don't want to work with you. And you know what? Have I lost money because of that? Yeah, probably so. It doesn't matter. It's the law. I can't lose my real estate license because I'm scared of losing a potential client. Well, this is my livelihood, okay? And so I have to be obviously explain the document really well to people so that they understand what's going on there. But you've got a lot of realtors out there that they're not having this signed until people are signing the buyer agency agreement or the listing agreement. And that's a big problem, okay? If you have a realtor that you're talking real estate with and you've not yet signed the disclosure of brokerage relationships, you're working with a realtor that is acting illegally. They are violating the law. Do you want to work with a realtor that's violating the law, specifically with regard to you? I don't think so. So be aware, okay? Nobody wants to sign this form, but the fact that we have to have you sign the form and we have to, as agents, sign the form as well, that's the law. If anyone doesn't do that, they are breaking the law, and that is definitely not someone that you want to be working with. So be very careful about that. Number 10, last but not least, is showings without a broker agreement or a buyer agency agreement in place. Listen, the National Association of Realtors 2 years ago made it very clear. 2 years ago, 1.5 years, whatever. They made it very clear. If you are showing houses to someone, if you're a realtor showing houses to the general public, you need to have an agreement in writing that you are working with them. They further clarified that agreement needs to specify compensation. So what they didn't say was that it had to be a buyer agency contract, okay? But if it already specifies that there's compensation, if it says something regarding compensation, then it's kind of implied it probably does need to be that a buyer agency agreement. Maybe some brokerages have come up with workarounds to avoid that, whatever. But the thing that concerns me is there are realtors that are showing houses without doing any sort of paperwork with the buyers. And again, that is against the Realtor Code of Ethics. That is something that can cause a realtor to get in massive trouble for. Again, they are violating the code of ethics that they agreed to uphold. Is that someone that you want to work with? I know, again, we're talking about paperwork. People don't like paperwork. They don't like to sign things. They don't like to feel like they have to hire a realtor. If I have someone come into town, they're meeting me for the first time, they want to look at houses, it's lousy that we have to do all this paperwork on the front end, but it has to be done. And if I lose a client over that, I'm not sweating it, okay? If they're not willing to sign paper right now, they're going to be difficult later. And I'm flexible. Like if it's someone that's just coming into town for a day, I'll have them sign an agreement. It could be a 1-day agreement. It could be for the weekend. No problem. Like I'm not going to ask you to commit to me for 6 months when we literally just met. Right? Who does that? Nobody does that. And if you have an agent that does that, that's also a scheme to look out for. Right? If they're saying, if they're using this as an excuse to go ahead and get you to commit to 6 months before you even met them or whatever, 6 months, a year, even 3 months, whatever, before you've ever met them, before you like really feel comfortable with signing that, but they're like, well, you want to look at houses, I only do 3 or 6 months agreements, whatever. That's something, be very careful, because again, it's not easy to break that contract, right? That has to be signed off by, in many instances, the broker in charge of the office. You agreed to it with the agent, but to unagree to it, the broker in charge has to sign off on it in many instances. So be very careful of that as well. So there's been, to kind of put a bow on this, there's been something in the water, and I've said this a few times, there's been something in the water in our market lately with people doing shady things. And that's what prompted me to do this episode, because I'm tired of the shady things happening without it being called out. I'm the guy that's going to call these things out because I don't care, right? I don't care if this angers people. I don't care if I end up being on blast on a podcast, on another realtor's podcast, whatever. Put me on blast. Just make sure you tag me first. I want to be tagged so I can respond to it. But there's something in the water. There's fishy stuff going on, and you guys need to be aware of it. So thank you so much. That's the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate all of you guys watching and listening. My contact information is in the show notes. If you need a realtor that does uphold the code of ethics and that does things legally, that's me. And so please contact me. And if you like this content, please subscribe, rate, review, all of those good things. I'll talk to you guys again next time.